Well, hello everyone, and welcome to DevCentral Connects. My name's John Wagnon with the DevCentral team, and it is great to see everyone out there today. As always, we are streaming live to YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and Periscope. So, man, if you could stream to it, we stream to it, right? So, thanks to everyone for joining us. You can chat with us, and we will interact with you. That's what we do here on DevCentral Connects. We connect with you, and today we have a really special and an exciting show for you. But before we get into that, I'll introduce everyone in a second. Before we get to that, I just wanted to take a quick second and talk about community. We are community. We are the DevCentral community. We help each other. We celebrate successes that we have together, right? We work through challenges that we have together. We encourage one another. We push each other to do better because we are a community and we're in this thing together. So recently, I'm sure you all have heard or seen F5, the big IP, has a vulnerability that was just released. And today we have an expert panel of F5 employees to talk about that and talk about what it is, how to fix this thing, how to patch, how to mitigate, those kinds of things, because we want to help you. We want to hear from you. We want to answer you. And we have an extra special guest on today that I'll introduce now. Her name's Kara Sprague. She's the Executive Vice President, so on our executive team, and also the General Manager of our Big IP family of offerings. And she wanted to just take a couple of minutes and speak to all of you out there just from that executive general manager perspective. And so, Kara, welcome to DevCentral Connects. Thanks for being here today, and I will turn this over to you for a few quick comments.
Terrific. Thank you so much, John. And thank you to you, our F5 customers, joining us today for this live Q&A as we discuss CVE 2020-5902. As John said, my name is Kara Sprague. I'm Executive Vice President and General Manager for our Big IP family of offerings. In just a few minutes, I'm going to turn the mic over to Sarah Boddy. She'll be our moderator for the Q&A session, in addition to our panel of Big IP platform security experts, which includes Megazone from our F5 CERT team, Jordan Zeber from F5 Platform Security Team, and Brian McHenry, who's our Director of Global Solution Architects for Security. Now, because of the severity of this vulnerability, F5 is recommending that customers immediately apply the latest patches on all of their Big IP instances. If your Big IP has its TMUI exposed to the internet and is not running a patched version of the software, it may already be compromised. And you should follow your internal incident response procedures. If you cannot immediately upgrade your Big IP, we advise you to do several things. First, ensure that there's not open internet access to TMUI. Secondly, limit the access to TMUI for all users, including your internal users. And finally, apply the latest additional mitigation recommendations that you can find in our security advisory. Now, it's important to note that these additional mitigation recommendations will continue to be updated as new threat vectors are discovered. And already we've made several updates to those in just the past few days. Now, we recognize the important role that Big IP plays in delivering and securing your applications, and that remediating this vulnerability may be disruptive to your business, and we appreciate the challenges of applying patches and mitigations across vast arrays of Big IP instances. F5 is here to support you. We're here today to provide clarity and tactical help to customers in remediating this critical remote code execution vulnerability. And we're going to start by answering questions that we know are top of mind for everybody. So please feel free to submit your questions in the chat window, and we're going to do our best to get to everybody's questions. If we can't get to your question, we will follow up on a Q&A page on DevCentral. So thank you again. Sarah, over to you.
Hey, thank you for that, Kara. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you, John, for letting us take over your show. So can you bring Megazone in? We really want to just dive straight into the Q&A. And I would love to kick it off with you, Megazone. Can you walk us through the background of this vulnerability and some of the details? Thank you.
Certainly. So this vulnerability is obviously a very severe vulnerability. It's a critical CVSS score of 10.0, which is about as bad as it gets. It affects the traffic management user interface, or Team UI, as we've been saying, otherwise known as the management console, or different things. It's the web GUI. It affects the self IPs as well as the management interface. Any way you can get to Team UI. It's control plane only. It's not data plane. So there's no concern about things like your virtual servers or things. It does allow for an attacker to fully compromise the system. If they've exploited this, they can pretty much have root access to all the information on the system. So if a system has been compromised, you would consider all the information on that system would also be compromised to be safe. So like digital certificates, SSL certs, credentials, configuration, anything that's on the box that root could see, an attacker would also be able to see.
Okay. Can you clarify how we see the customer scope in terms of impact?
The main, I guess, all boxes are vulnerable. The main threat would be public interfaces if Team UI is available to the internet. Obviously, that's the highest risk of attack from unauthenticated attackers. There's also the internal threats. As I said, all the affected products are still vulnerable. So you have to be also concerned about lateral attacks, pivoting attacks, where somebody might compromise another box. So even if you say my management interface is on a private LAN, if another device on that LAN is compromised, they could pivot over to the big IP and compromise that. So we really are encouraging customers to patch as expeditiously as possible. In the meantime, if patching is not possible, we do have some configuration mitigations that we are updating as new intelligence comes in, new threat vectors are identified. But the ultimate solution is to patch.
Right, right. So absolutely, absolutely critical. If your traffic management user interface is open to the public internet, limit that immediately, followed by apply the patch as soon as possible. Brian, you talk to customers a lot. Have you run into customers that are thinking that maybe this isn't that urgent of an issue for them to patch because they didn't have their Team UI exposed publicly, or maybe they're thinking, I don't have to apply the patch urgently because it wasn't? And what would you say to them? Oh, we don't hear your audio. Live streaming events, people.
Yeah, I think, and I have experience here. I should be better than that. So I don't think I've encountered anybody directly that doesn't see the urgency of this. I think the media coverage has quite stirred up the appropriate level of, shall we say, excitement. So most of the folks I've talked to feel it's urgent. If you don't feel it's urgent, here's why you should, right? So even if you're not exposing your interface to the internet, right? So many of our customers, following best practices, have not exposed TMUI either on the management interface, the physical management interface, or on a self IP. They haven't exposed TMUI to the internet, so they figure, oh, well, I'm fine. And probably you are, but you should examine the interfaces where the networks, rather, where those interfaces are exposed. Are you using strong authentication on those interfaces? Are those networks truly trusted? And by truly trusted, I mean, is it air-gapped? Is it a bastion host that only has access to that TMUI interface? So there's a number of things you can do above and beyond simply not exposing it to the internet. Obviously, it's exposed to the internet, assume breach. But even if you haven't exposed to the internet, it's time to kind of probably take a look, make sure that no one that you don't trust explicitly has access to those networks. And that the authentication you're using and other measures you're using, whether it's bastion hosts or so-called air gaps, that those are in place to protect wherever TMUI might need to be exposed for you to either manage or orchestrate or what have you. So definitely take a look. It's definitely time to reevaluate. Still want to check for IOCs, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But certainly, everybody should kind of take a good hard look at their systems and how the TMUI is exposed, and make sure that they feel confident that they've taken the appropriate countermeasures before this was announced. Yeah. And the risks of internal pivot attacks, should not be minimized, right? Not to point fingers or share,
industry-wide, there's a lot of critical remote code execution vulnerabilities that are released all the time. It's likely that those exist within other software that you have inside of your network. And that's where the risk of the pivot attack really comes into play. And that's why we really want customers to apply that patch as soon as possible. Some friends of our researcher group, Scientia, just did a recent report where they said the average amount of time it takes an enterprise to patch a critical is 100 days. But we know that attackers are weaponizing critical vulnerabilities really quickly. So if you have this F5 vulnerability, even though your TMUI is locked down, it's possible there's other vulnerabilities that exist where somebody could get to the internal management interface. So it's really, really, really critical that people apply the patch as soon as possible. Jordan, I'd like to jump to you. Can you advise customers on how to understand if they're vulnerable?
Sure. I think that the panelists so far have done a great job at describing some of the different aspects of the vulnerability and how to understand if you're vulnerable. I'll just reiterate some of that in that versions 11x, 12x, 13x, 14x, 15x, those are, including engineering hotfixes based on those versions are vulnerable. We do have patches available for those sustaining versions. As far as exposure goes, the panelists have done a good job already kind of describing that it really depends on what networks and users have access to your TMUI. And we've highlighted that, you know, if your system is exposed to the internet, you're at most risk. If you followed our longstanding guidance, which is to restrict network access to the TMUI, your risk is significantly reduced, but it is not completely gone. And it becomes more a function of which systems and users have access to TMUI, like what Brian had said. Now, there's plenty of POC scripts out there. There's Nmap scripts. There's countless GitHub repositories. There's a Metasploit module. These will all help you detect that the issue exists, but that's exploiting the issue. You can simply look at the KB article, and if your big IP version you're running is not listed in the fixed column, then it is a vulnerable system. We do have a service, F5 iHealth, which has heuristics that can help determine if your system is vulnerable. We also have a heuristic that can help you to determine if your management port or self IP is using public IPs without port lockdown. We also can look at logs to determine if there have been access attempts from routable IP addresses, giving us a good indication that an interface is exposed to the internet.
Thank you. So given the severity of this vulnerability, the fact that proof of concept code is out there in public, and we know that there's active attack campaigns targeting the vulnerability, we are really advising customers, if they had that TMUI interface exposed to the internet at the point in time that this vulnerability was disclosed, that they should assume a breach. It is the most logical, rational assumption to make at this point. So Brian, if customers are rightfully worried about the situation right now, what guidance do you give them if they want to look into the potential for somebody exploiting this vulnerability on their system?
So looking at the question here from Matt Kish, how can we determine if TMUI is exposed to the internet? You can look to see what the port lockdown settings are in self IPs. That's the most likely way a management interface is going to be exposed to the internet. Look at those port lockdown settings. If they're anything but none, if they're default not is going to allow this through. It's going to allow 443 traffic in. So if that is the case, if it's default or all, anything other than none, check to see if that IP has a NAT rule on your firewall. That's the simplest way. Look, trace the path outwards and see if there's a NAT rule that allows traffic inbound on that port. If it's not exposed, yes, it is somewhat less critical. However, as I mentioned earlier, you want to take a look at the network that self IP or management interface IP is on. You want to take a look at that network and see who else has access in my organization to this network. If it's a DMZ area, it might be less secured. If it's a private network that's really mostly only servers, maybe you're in good shape. But you should have somewhere in your InfoSec policy who has access to which networks. And if you don't have that today, this is probably a wake-up call to make sure that you're really keeping a good track of who has access to what networks and how we're enabling access, to our systems, not just big IP, but all our systems in our infrastructure.
Right, right. And if anybody needs help with this, we really encourage people to call F5 support and get through to the F5 Security Incident Response Team, which Megazone is on. We are here to help customers with this, so don't be shy about calling. Megazone, can you also talk to them about iHealth, because that's another easy, quick way for them to get a report on whether or not their TMUI is exposed, and maybe give them some insights into how the CERT might be able to help?
Certainly. Yes, for those not familiar, we have iHealth. iHealth.f5.com is our analytical tool. For those familiar with F5 products, you can generate what we call a quick view or a QK view from the unit. It's uploaded to iHealth, which it has heuristics built in that will analyze the upload. One thing, it looks for things like connections coming from public IP addresses. So if you see a login to the box and the source IP for that connection is a routable IP, then that box must be visible to the internet. Or at least a public IP. I guess there's possibly you have internal routable IPs, but it's an alarm that it'll flag, and there's some other conditions basically it will flag that help you determine if you're on exposed to the internet. We are also looking at updating. We've added some heuristics as we get more intelligence. We're looking at adding other heuristics for flagging exploits that we know of, but there are already many hundreds of heuristics in iHealth that will identify a number of known compromise situations, such as one thing we're seeing with this compromise quite a lot is unusual files being left on the box or files in places you don't expect them. There are already heuristics from the past that are already running in iHealth that will flag that kind of information. As far as what the F5 CERT's doing, our role primarily internally is supporting supporters, our frontline global services teams that handle the support cases coming in. We're providing subject matter expertise, helping to provide guidance on mitigations, on helping to identify compromised systems. If customers ask, I think I've been compromised, can you help me confirm that? So we're providing guidance to those teams. The F5 CERT is a very focused, fairly small team, so we're using our global services team as a force multiplier, backing them up, providing them information, because there's obviously many more people in support than there are on our team, so we can handle the customer cases coming in.
Yeah, for sure. Makes sense. Okay, so Jordan, I'm going to ask you one more question to provide clarity around the indicators of compromise that we shared in the current support article, just to close out the how to really look into whether or not you might be compromised. And then we're going to get into details of the patch, which is an update, and temporary mitigations that we are offering to customers, because we realize that it takes a while to apply updates. It's not a full upgrade, it's updates in a patch. But because it's going to take a while for a lot of customers to get that update applied, we have temporary mitigations that are in the support article. So first, Jordan, can you go through the indicators of compromise, and then we'll jump to details of the patch update. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So first, I would just want to put it out there that something we know is that advanced attackers will certainly hide their tracks in an attempt to maintain system access. So it's unfortunate in this case, but the reality is that sometimes there are no noticeable indicators of compromise. One of the things that our KB article mentions to look for are suspicious requests, and those suspicious requests to the TMUI would include anything that has a ... semicolon, or anything that includes the term HSQLDB in the path. I would say those are a dead giveaway that someone is trying to attack you and trying to compromise the system. The post indicators that you may look for are things that you would expect in a normal situation where your box has potentially been compromised, such as modifications to configuration, surprising new users or modified user accounts, suspicious processes and or files, like what Megazone had mentioned earlier. One of the things that our iHealth service can do is it has a heuristic that can take a look and see if it can detect a compromised big IP that may be running malware or have suspicious processes running. It doesn't catch 100% of the cases, but it can certainly do a good swag at trying to find, has the system been compromised?
Right. Okay. Can you clarify to everybody how the mitigations in the support article differ from the patch, which is an update, which is a fix?
Yes. So what we should first recognize is the mitigations we provided originally, the first iteration of the article. Those were intended to block the directory traversal forms of the attack, and that's the ... semicolon. We've since updated those to be a little broader and eliminated the access to HSQLDB. Those are how we are seeing attackers exploiting this vulnerability from an unauthenticated standpoint, meaning random scans of the internet with an unauthenticated user. Those mitigations, however, did not and cannot address an authenticated attacker, so a malicious insider with access to the big IP. Those temporary mitigations are unable to stop authenticated attackers. This is highlighted in our knowledge base article. What we saw over the last couple of days is, as the situation progressed, that there was additional vectors we needed to add to our knowledge base article because we were seeing different attacks. And I would just want to do a shout out for Team Aries, which is a security research team, which has helped us and over the last couple of days in terms of understanding what they're seeing out in the field. Our software fix, however, took all the additional vectors that into account and close those off, both from an unauthenticated and an authenticated user standpoint. So while we included this ... semicolon directory traversal mitigation as part of our original fixes, in no way did we consider that that was going to be the complete set of fixes for us. Our complete set of fixes is a number of changes to TMUI, which include very strict command filtering and additional authorization checks that are placed on the pages. We patched the application server that we're using, which is Tomcat, to stop treating the semicolon character as a special character. That was actually part of the original vulnerability. As of today, we know of no ways in which our software fixes are bypassed. The patches that we have are what we are considering the fix, and it is what we recommend all customers apply to address this TMUI vulnerability.
Yep, bottom line. Thank you, Michael Breeden, for your comment that we're showing here. And we've recognized that patch and upgrade have been used interchangeably in some of the documentation that's been published by us over the last week, and we're really making a concerted effort to clarify that. Brian, do you want to jump in here and talk about why we keep using the term update lately versus an upgrade? The patch is an update.
Yeah, so we've done significant work over the last year to 2 years to update our version schema with how our customers manage those versions in mind, right? So in the past, we had just a major and minor release, and then eventually we introduced a major, minor, plus maintenance release. And more recently, now we have major, minor, maintenance release, and then point release. And so what that does is enables you to standardize on, say, 15.1, and then get maintenance release rollups with hotfix rollups in the maintenance release. So you could have 15.1.1. And for events like this, where we need to introduce something urgently, we can introduce a point release. So this doesn't affect you as far as how your organization is standardized on a version. And so if you standardize on 15.1.x, this enables you to upgrade without a lot of friction in terms of your organizational standards. Now, it's also bears mentioning that there are very strict guidelines that we put in place in our software lifecycle policy about what can go in a maintenance release versus what can go in a point release. So a point release really is only for fixes. And so you can apply this with confidence that it should not cause breakage in your system. Now that presumes that you're in the main train where you are. So if you're on a minor release, so of a .0, you're going to have to get to a .1 to get the current point release, right? Because that's where that .1, X.1 is our long-term sustaining track for any given branch of code. So we're really trying to classify a point release as a patch. So customers don't want to think about upgrading to a whole new version, which can introduce new behaviors, new features and capabilities, which we associate with more potential for introducing bugs and other defects. So we're very conscious of trying to offer release vehicles that enable you to fix problems without introducing new ones, as well as conforming to your organizational standards. So really should see this as a much more straightforward process without the need to sort of recertify a version and create a much longer life cycle towards patching. But ultimately, as Jordan highlighted, this is the fix for it, right? You've got to get to the latest point release in your branch of code, whether it's 12, 13, 14, 15.x. Get to that latest point release that's documented in the K article, and that's where you're going to have your fix. Now, even though this is a patch with only fixes in it, in the point release, you're still going to have to set up a maintenance window to do this. So we don't mean to trivialize it, but we are trying to give you confidence that there are only fixes in here. It's a very minor change to the code, as it were. And then last but not least, just to address some things I've seen on the internet, that we released a vulnerability without a patch. And that's a little bit due to the confusion around the mitigations we talked about. What some of the security researchers out there on the internet found ways around some of the workaround mitigations. However, there was no bypass of the patch we released on the day we publicized the vulnerability. So it should be very clear that there has been a fix for this from 0 day, quote unquote. We've had a fix in place, but at the same time we published the fix via software patch, we also published workarounds and mitigations to try to help customers get some level of protection, because we know that applying a patch, it can be require maintenance windows and other process and procedure that can slow you down while you're trying to mitigate risk.
Yep. Okay, we are going to take some questions from the chat. So John, question. John asked the question, what is F5's confidence level of the patch fixed code in terms of stability?
I can take that one.
Please do.
Right now, high confidence. We've not seen any indications of any problems with the code fixes that we've provided in that updated software. People obviously have been beating on this fix for the past over the week now. We have not seen any issues with the code. It was extensively tested before release. The original researcher who reported the issue to us tested it as well and said that it seemed to completely fix the issue as they saw it. So at this point, we have a pretty high confidence level on it. I believe that it's fixed. I mean, I should knock on wood, but I believe it's fixed.
High confidence there.
Yeah, we ran through a series of regression tests to ensure we didn't have problems there. We also had a very good indication in the TMUI changes that we made, the specific places that we needed to test. So we did specific point testing in the areas in which we knew may be impacted.
Great. Thank you for the question, John. John, since we took over your DevCentral Connect show today, can I ask you to pop up some more questions from the audience for us? And we're going to be taking a look at the chat and answering things as we see them come through as well, too. Oh, lo and boy, can I make my own computer as live? Somebody's asking if there's any attacker TTPs that we have discovered. We would probably point you back to the indicators of compromise in the KB article, the support article.
From Imran, version 16 released 2 days ago, how confident F5 is about the stability in terms of the fixes. The fixes for the vulnerability are in version 16.0. That version is not vulnerable. That should be in the knowledge base article.
Yeah, it was included in one of the more recent updates to the article. Once that published, it was added to the table.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions in the chat that we're kind of scouring through right now.
Yeah.
I want to be clear with everybody that we are going to answer all the questions because we obviously aren't going to get to everything in the live session today. We are going to answer all the questions in a DevCentral Q&A page. We are doing this live Q&A at 3 different times to cover a global audience, and so you're not going to see that Q&A page be completed until after we finish all the live sessions, which won't end until tomorrow. I'm seeing a question: how do we mitigate on Azure? Are the versions in the fix already available for public cloud platforms?
Okay, I'll jump in. At this point in time, I don't believe, I know no one's eager for that one. I don't believe the cloud platforms have the updates yet. They've definitely been released. Our cloud team has released them to the different clouds that we support. I know there's AWS, Azure, Google, I think there's some others. Every cloud platform has a process that they have. When we provide new software to them, they have verification is basically a timed process that they go through. So I know it's in process of being released. I don't know offhand or something like that. I don't want to misspeak, so we'd have to check on that offline if I find out if we know when the dates that it will be live. Depending on your cloud instance, though, if you have a multi-slot cloud instance, they can generally be upgraded in place. So you can take the ISOs that we have. If you have a single slot instance, those can't be upgraded in place.
I believe we've got confirmation on a back channel that AWS is pushing, should have those out shortly, if not already. And Azure is a little bit behind them, from what I understand.
Okay.
So regarding the question that's up about the temporary mitigations finished being tweaked, we are continuing to monitor the situation. If there are new avenues of exploit that get released, we will be updating some of the location match mitigations. The standing mitigation of don't expose to untrusted networks and or the internet is something that has been our recommendation for a while. So that has not changed. I don't know if we can speak to saying we'll never change any more location matches in the future because we want to be able to react to anything we see in the field. But at this point, as of this morning, the mitigations that we have on our KB article are the ones that are stopping the known attacks that are on the internet today.
Right.
Yep. Another question, question for Mark Gallagher. That question came to his management, to him, about whether or not the vulnerability is limited to the management UI or if this can be exploited via the iControl API.
I can take that. So they both listen on the same socket. So they're both available like in default on port 443. It just depends on the path that you hit. iControl REST, iControl SOAP APIs, those are not vulnerable to this issue. However, an attacker with access to port 443 where iControl SOAP and TMUI are available, that exposes it.
Right.
Okay. Searching through lots and lots of questions. This is great. We really
question early on in the chat that was along those same lines, and Jordan, maybe you want to comment, or MZ, about, I only had SSH exposed. I didn't have 443 exposed. Would I be considered vulnerable then?
No, not this vulnerability affects only the web interface, the TMUI. And just to be clear, like it says this in the security advisory, but to reiterate it here, the default on most platforms is 443. There are some places where it defaults to 8443, and it's possible for the user to customize that port. So to generalize it, what port your TMUI is listening on is the one you have to worry about. So SSH is not affected. Any other protocol is not affected. This is only coming through HTTPD. Whatever port you have HTTPD listening on is the issue.
What's the procedure for applying a hotfix on the big IPVE?
It's a pretty well documented procedure, available in a knowledge base article.
Yeah.
Depending on the system, in summary, you upload an ISO, you say, put it in this new boot location, it copies the config over, and then when you have a scheduled maintenance window, you reboot into that boot location.
Yep. Yeah, very similar to a physical big IP. There's not much difference at all.
And that kind of goes back to like what about in Azure, the mitigations for location matching and access controls can apply there as well.
Great. From Ben Kluvar, is there evidence of attacks exploiting this TMUI vulnerability prior to the release of the patch?
No. The answer is that no, we had no evidence of this being exploited. Obviously, this was reported to us by third-party researchers, so it was found outside of F5, but they followed coordinated responsible disclosure and approached us. We saw no evidence of this in the field. Even after we published on June 30th, Tuesday, over a week ago, it took a few days before we started seeing evidence of it actually being exploited. Kind of Friday into the weekend is when we first saw evidence of exploits.
Yep. We got honeypots and various systems in place to detect that, and it took until about Friday to see it.
I'll take the question. Do the current mitigations cause any interruption other than to TMUI? Not as far as we know. The mitigations apply to the Apache configuration. Those specific mitigations will not affect data plane traffic. You don't have to restart your system or anything. And as far as we know, there are no detrimental side effects to applying the Apache location match mitigations.
Yeah, and even just to say it says other than to TeamUI, actually the mitigations we provided should not even cause any interruption to TeamUI, because the location matches, the mitigations we have mitigate exploit traffic, but do not affect legitimate connections. So there shouldn't be any disruption.
And just to clarify, we've been throwing a lot of terms around, everything from upgrade to update to patch to mitigation. So when we say mitigation, we're talking about workarounds, scripts, configuration changes that will reduce the risk without changing the software version, without updating to the patched versions that we've published in the K article. So just for clarity, when we say mitigation, we're really talking about workarounds with the configuration of the appliance, not anything to do with actually changing the software version or doing any system maintenance of that nature.
Fernando Diaz is asking, how do we know the upgrade actually fixes the vulnerability, and can it be tested?
Sure. I mean, there's plenty of GitHub repositories and or security tools out there in the ecosystem that if you want to test independently, go right ahead. Metasploit is one. There's an Nmap script, and I'd say at this point, at least over 10 GitHub repositories that have some form of the test cases that you could run.
Yep. I see somebody else asking in chat if there's logs that somebody could be looking at to know if the vulnerability was getting targeted, and the answer to that is yes, and that's what's in the indicators of compromise and the default logging in that knowledge base article. And we'll continue to share that out, and in the Q&A response that we publish on DevCentral, we'll make sure that you guys all have that. And you can also get to that KB article, not only go into the F5 support page, but you can go to our main homepage. There's a link to everything that we are disclosing about this vulnerability off the homepage of f5.com.
And as we confirm new indications of compromise, we are adding them. Like there's another one, I think, on its way to the article. Like as we identify things, as customer cases come in, we're monitoring all this information. So as we see anything that we have a confidence level we can publish, because sometimes you're kind of like, I'm not sure if that's an indicator or not. But if we have a pretty good confidence level, it's linked to the compromise, we will be adding those things to the security advisory. That's our source of truth for this.
Yeah, we are trying to minimize the amount of places people need to get to go to for information. The source of truth is always the F5 support page and that knowledge base article, the KB article. We are trying to share as much information with the community as possible, and that information is on DevCentral. Think of it as an editorialized explanation of the vulnerability, but we always link back to our source of truth, which is the KB article. That was the comment from Christian that I was talking about. So thank you. We answered that question too.
Okay. I see one asking who's the most affected. The most affected would be, again, I know we've said this already, but to reiterate it, anyone whose TMUI is reachable from the internet. If you have your TMUI exposed either on the management interface or a self IP, and you can access that interface from the internet, those are the highest risks. At this point, we were even saying in the security advisory that if you have a system that has TMUI exposed to the internet and it has not been patched with the fixed software and the mitigations haven't been in place, it probably is compromised. You're likely to have been compromised at this point because of the activity around this CVE. If you're not exposed to the internet, if your TMUI is not exposed to the public internet, it doesn't mean you're scot-free. Don't worry about it. You should still take precautions because, as we said earlier, there are pivoting attacks, lateral attacks within your network. If any other device on that network, say a server, is compromised, they could pivot and attack the big IP on the management interface or the internal self IP. So we definitely encourage people to mitigate, and we definitely encourage people to patch, to install the fixed software. If we're not able to do that in the short term, because we know it takes customers time to do this, to apply the mitigations at least as a stopgap measure, as a minimum measure, to reduce their exposure.
100%. Evan Fox is saying some would consider this type of vulnerability pretty trivial. What is being done at F5 to ensure that new and existing vulnerabilities of this flavor are being caught before being released? There's a lot of answers to that. Jordan, do you want to talk about some of the efforts that you do? And I know we are addressing this at a larger level, and frankly, that's why Kara joined us in the beginning of this call, to show our executive support in our reaction to this. But there are a lot of processes that we go through on a day in and day out basis. That's Jordan's job, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jordan, we've traditionally done a very extensive job of fuzz testing and other types of platform security testing, both internally as well as external audits. Can you comment, Jordan, on sort of what other activities we've been engaging in to enhance that further? Because I think we in general at F5 have a pretty good track record of this type of vulnerability not kind of making it into a production version of code.
Sure. Sorry, it was kind of jumping in and out. I didn't know that. Sorry that you were calling on me.
It's all good.
So right now, what we're doing is we're looking at how we can make significant improvements to how we're doing testing. We've hired right now 2 external pen testing firms to help us and to review our system and the fixes that we have. They're going through testing as we speak. We run a number of security scanners and do a number of fuzz tests against the system. This one slipped by for many years. It's unfortunate. Vulnerabilities happen. And we're going to do the best that we can to make sure that we get better coverage in this area.
Yeah. And we are being as open and honest and transparent as possible, which hopefully you guys see in the Q&A session that we're doing today. This is something that is very important to us as a business.
You want me to take that one?
Yeah, go for it, please. Can it be accessed through a port other than 443 or 22 SSH?
Yeah, so we did address this earlier, but just to reiterate, port 22 is not a concern for this vulnerability. The vulnerability is strictly through the traffic management user interface, TMUI, which is the web administration interface. By default, on most platforms, it runs on 443. There's more detail in the security advisory. There are some configurations, some single alarm things that runs on 8443. It's also customizable, so some customers may have changed the port number HTTP is listening on. So in general, the concern is whatever port HTTPD is listening on, and that's the only port involved for this vulnerability.
Jason Hawk is asking, is it an Apache issue or is it specific to F5's customization of Apache?
It's not. It's F5's use of Apache. It's not even a customization of Apache. It's I believe, Jordan, you said this earlier, that the attack chain involves Apache, Tomcat, and then our Java code. the fixed code that we put out there fixes the Java code, the patches Tomcat, the code in Tomcat, as well as makes some config changes to Apache. That the issue in Apache is really, and I don't think we've clarified this yet on the call. There are two sets of attackers: unauthenticated attackers, which is random people on the net who don't have legitimate access to the big IP. The directory traversal part of the attack that's kind of getting the most publicity is actually just the first link and the smallest link in that attack chain that gets you around the authentication in HTTPD to the Tomcat and Java code issues that are on the back end. There's also an authenticated attack vector where somebody who has a login, a legitimate login to the big IP, can log into that big IP and then basically do a privilege escalation attack locally. And so if you have a low privileged user who has a low privileged admin account, can get root level access on the box. That completely bypasses the HTTPD issue completely because they're already logged in. They've gotten past the login step. So at that point, the exploits for that are different, and I don't really see those in the wild right now, so I'm not going to talk about those. But they get to the same thing on the backside, but the route there is a little different because they've avoided having to do the end run around HTTPD.
Right. For exposed or potentially compromised devices, and I apologize, I don't want to butcher your username, so I didn't quote it. For exposed or potentially compromised devices, can we consider that a restore from a UCS backup from June 22nd is safe enough, or should we consider to recover from scratch?
So,
go ahead.
Sorry, Megazone. So I would say yes, with a caveat, right? We don't. I think Megazone indicated early in the stream today that prior to publication we don't know of it being compromised, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't have been. It just means it was unlikely. What you should do is if you do restore from a UCS backup from prior to publication, I would still go in and change passwords. Make sure you follow. There's a lot of system hygiene checks that we advocate with a system that's suspected of compromise. You may want to consider things like revoking any SSL certs and keys that were on the system. So there's a number of things that, even though the backup might be clean, there are things that are secrets, passwords, search keys, things of that nature that do need to be revoked or updated, changed, so that you can be sure that those credentials or those secrets are not compromised any longer.
Yep. I'm seeing a lot of questions and comments in the chat about whether or not we're going to publish videos explaining the vulnerability, or maybe if we're even going to demonstrate an exploit. We actually do have a Lightboard lesson up. John, whose show we're taking over, is really great at those Lightboard lessons. And so there is a video that explains the vulnerability and walks through the mitigations. So we encourage you guys to check that out. We probably will not be doing any videos demonstrating the exploit. I don't think that puts our customers in a good position. We wouldn't do that. We'll save that for the black hats of the world. I understand the question, though, but we wouldn't do that from our seats for F5. Again, probably save that for the black hats of the world. We don't want to arm attackers anymore than necessary.
I've seen about a dozen of those videos. If you want them, they're out there to find.
Yeah, they're not hard to find, unfortunately. So, looking through lots of more questions. This is really great, you guys. We really appreciate all the questions. This has been a very lively chat. Mario, what would be the best action to follow on a compromised system? I would like to caveat that with, we encourage you always to follow your own internal incident response procedures. We will give you best practice guidelines, but first and foremost, you should have your own internal processes and procedures that you should follow first. But I'll let the guys chime in, and I'm sure I'll have something to say here too.
My answer to that is K11438344, considerations and guidance when you suspect a security compromise on a big IP system. So we have an entire K article. It's actually linked in the security advisory, I think in a couple of places, but it's mentioned and linked in the security advisory. But it also, if you just search, like if you go to Google, which is why I just did, and search F5 compromised system, this is like the top hit. At least for me it was. But we have a document that basically describes what to do. But the general overview is, if it's been compromised, you're going to want to reinstall that system from external media. Do not do an in-place upgrade. Basically you clean it, you wipe it, you're going to reinstall it, and then, as Brian was saying, you might be able to reinstall from a UCS that was taken prior to the compromise if you're confident in that. And again, customers must follow their own policies on this. But any information that was on that system, we're going to keep reiterating this. SSL certs, credentials, configuration, anything that's a sensitive thing that was on that system should also be considered compromised, because the attacker had root access. If anything root can read, the attacker could have read. So you'll want to refresh all that information.
100%. Ellen Lowe is asking if there's an article for system hygiene checks. I'm sure we have content for that. We also really encourage customers to run their configuration, export a QK view in the iHealth check. That is a really good way to get a report really quickly.
Yeah. Another good tip is if you happen to have big IQ, there's configuration diff capabilities as well in there. So you could, and there are third-party configuration management tools that would enable you to do this. Config diffs is a great way to say, something has changed, and then you can kind of look at your change log and say, well, no, there were no authorized changes in between these two snapshots. So that, there's a couple of different ways you can approach that, but certainly this is a time where your investment in log systems and configuration management systems can pay significant dividends in helping you find IOCs beyond what we could give you guidance about. Right, this is all about managing your infrastructure at scale and knowing sort of what you have, having a good inventory of what you have and the state of things. So really really look into how you're managing things. Big IQ provides you a lot of tools as a centralized management tool, and then there are third-party systems that many of our customers integrate that are useful in this type of activity.
Yeah, I would really advocate for continual external vulnerability tests. It was something that we used to run. We used to try to do it after every single change in my last organization, but at a minimum of every month. And it was actually pretty common for people to expose management interfaces publicly. Even people that are really sophisticated, it happens accidentally in changes. Sometimes it happens intentionally when you're doing data center projects and you open things up. So it's really important for people to keep an eye on this all the time, as Brian said. But if you really want a really clean report, iHealth is a quick way for you to figure that out. Christopher Green, hello. This might have been covered, but would the landing page of APM be vulnerable as this uses HTTPD?
It is not. That should be in our solution article. If it's not, we may consider an update, but that aspect is not vulnerable.
Jay Lou is, oh, sorry, go.
I was going to say, we said this earlier, but this applies only to control plane, HTTPD on the control plane. It does not apply to anything on the data plane, which is where that would land.
Yeah, so why are the cloud providers slow, right? The cloud is fast. The cloud is auto-healing and super fast patching. The reality is that although, the cloud is very malleable and easy to update, we have procedures in place as a third-party vendor to all the major public cloud providers where they vet our releases as they come in. So they don't automatically just let us post up stuff the second it's ready on our end. So when we had a ready release, a point release to address these, we had to submit them. Think of it somewhat like the iTunes App Store or Google Play, right? Your app goes into a queue to get reviewed before it gets posted to a marketplace. And the public cloud providers are not necessarily any better or any faster at that, right? So they vet our Amazon machine images and AWS and and our images in Azure and Google Cloud Platform. So most of these are trickling out. Google Cloud Platform's got, interestingly enough, 13 and 15, but not 14 ready. I believe AWS has most everything. Azure's a little bit behind, but they are moving as quickly as they can. We did make these things available to them, as soon as they were ready, and it's just a matter of process and procedure. And that, and I have to respect that the public cloud providers do need to protect their platform and make sure that we're not just hastily slapping something together and pushing it to them, right? So they're taking their time and measuring speed against safety. And as much as we'd all like it to be done just like that, as soon as it's ready, there are procedures that have to be observed.
Yes. Jay Lou is wondering why we don't have punch and pie available for everybody. I think we would all love dessert and a drink. Good. Oh, monster. That's good. Raul is asking, does iHealth find such kind of vulnerability, and does it have recommendations?
Yes, it does. It has heuristics that can detect not only this, but other vulnerabilities that may be present in the system. As we said earlier, it also has the ability to help you identify particular configurations that may be more exposed than others. So iHealth is a great service and tool at your disposal. I would recommend all customers to use it.
Okay. All right, I think we'll take one more question and then we're going to wrap it up because we got about 3 minutes left on the live stream. Who is going to be the lucky last question runner? Is it possible for an attacker to leverage this vulnerability to export data from a TCP dump? The Saint Ors.
Yes.
Yes.
Your root. If they've successfully fully exploited this vulnerability, they are root. So anything root can do, like running TCP dump, the attacker could also do. So yes, basically consider it. Can you do it logged into root? Yes. Then the attacker can do it.
Yes. Okay. So to summarize this conversation, because of the severity of this vulnerability, F5 recommends that customers immediately apply the latest patches to all of your Big IP instances. If your Big IP has the Traffic Management User Interface, TMUI, exposed to the internet and it is not running a patched version of software, you may already be compromised. And this is where we are recommending that you guys follow your internal incident response procedures. We have talked about that a lot today. If you cannot immediately upgrade your Big IP, we advise you to ensure first and foremost that the TMUI is not exposed to the internet. If it is, you need to immediately limit access to that for all users, and then apply the latest mitigation recommendations that we have in the KB article, the latest support article available. Note that those additional mitigation recommendations could be updated as new threat vectors are discovered. So really, please consider those temporary. They are gap measures for you until you can get the patch applied. Any final notes? We really appreciate you guys joining us today. John's going to take over, closing out his show. We really appreciate you letting us take over. And we really appreciate all the customers that joined. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Sarah and Brian and Megazone and Jordan. What an amazing show this is. So I've got some good news and I got some more good news. Good news is you just heard from the brightest and best that F5 has to offer on this vulnerability, the mitigations, the patches, the fixes. So we want to be in this with you. We are in this together, right? The other good news is we're going to do this again. So if you didn't have your question highlighted, join us again this evening at 6:00 p.m. Pacific time. And then we're going to do it again tomorrow morning. So that's going to be at 8:00 a.m. Pacific time. Same show, same topic. So if you got what you needed, that's fantastic. If you want to join again, then please do that. We want to connect with you. And we appreciate you, our customers, our DevCentral community. Like I said, man, we're all in this together. So thanks for joining us today on DevCentral Connects. We will be back here every single Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific with a lot of different topics. This week, of course, is a little unique because of the vulnerability and the way we wanted to get all the information out there. But we have a whole host of different topics, around the DevCentral community with what you guys ask and care about. So we want to continue to connect with you. So make sure you join us every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, and we will see you next time on DevCentral Connects. Thanks so much.